Welcome to Cascade Talks, celebrating 10 years of Cascade research.
Croeso i'r sgyrsiau Cascade, dathlu 10 mlynedd o ymchwil Cascade. Dyma podlediad sy'n trafod yr ymchwil a'r arloesi sy'n digwydd ym maes gofal cymdeithasol I blant.
A podcast that discusses and explores the latest research and innovation in the field of children's social care.
Hello, welcome, and I'm really glad you're choosing to at least try listening to this podcast, where we're going to be talking a bit about Cascade, but more generally about social work research and what difference it might make. My name's Donald Forrester. I'm a professor at Cardiff University, and I'm the director of Cascade, Centre for Children's Social Care Research and Development, and I'm delighted to be here with Sally.
I'm Sally Holland. I'm a professor of social work, also based in Cascade in the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff Uni. And in Cascade at the moment, I'm leading on public involvement in research and also public affairs.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And Sally's the founding director of Cascade. She set the whole thing up. And I was lucky enough to take over the reins when she went on to be Children's Commissioner. Today, though, we're going to present a bit of a fairly brief history of Cascade and then focus a bit on what difference research makes, how we might think about that, and provide a bit of an introduction to some other podcasts that are coming up in this short series about social work and social work research, and then finishing hopefully with future directions and some exciting new developments. So I sort of thought it would be really good to start off with how it all began, Sally, and hear from you about how the idea and then the reality of Cascade came to happen.
Yeah, it's looking back now at when I was first starting to sort of think about Cascade. Obviously, it wasn't called Cascade then. I was thinking about, could we have a centre here at Cardiff Uni? Back in 2012, I was thinking, it now looking back, it all seems really easy. And I can't believe now how easy it was in some ways, because in the current higher education funding climate, I think it would be much, much harder to get going than it was then. But back in 2012, we had lots of really active researchers working on children's social care research. We just got a few really decent grants and to do some quite exciting projects. And we had lots of PhD students and master's students working in this area, but we did not have a home. We were sort of dispersed across the social sciences in Cardiff Uni. And I think especially from people coming from outside looking in and were looking for who could help me with understanding more about children's social care, especially in Wales. There was no sense of where they would go and who they would approach. And in fact, there's no home, no centre for children's social care research in Wales at all. There were one or two really excellent ones in both England, Wales and really good work in Northern Ireland. But there was nothing in Wales that anyone could point to and say, that's where children's social care research is centred. And then there was just a couple of really quite useful events that happened. So the university opened a scheme saying you could have research leave for a year if you, which is again feels now like gold dust, and a tiny bit of money. I think it was a few £1,000 if you've got a good idea. So I just put in a bid and said, well, could you give me a year to try and get this going? And they said yes, which was nice. So I didn't have to teach for a year. And I think I was still working part-time then. All my academic career had been part-time up till then. But I just thought, gosh, what a lovely space. And I sort of did it, really. I went round talking to people that would have an interest in it, people like policymakers and other people, researchers, people that use services, and said, what would you like it to look like? What would you like us to study? It took ages to come up with a name. Absolutely ages. It's so hard, isn't it, to come up with a name?
Well, it is, but it's a good name. How did you come up with the name?
I ended up with a couple of colleagues, Jonathan Schofield and E.J. Reynolds. I remember us texting each other one evening saying, oh, it sounds so boring, Children's Social Care Research Centre. I can't think of an acronym. I think it was E.J. actually that came up with CASCADE, and it doesn't quite fit.
Quite an acronym, but nearly.
And I remember someone at the time saying, as very senior experienced academics saying, oh, your acronym's got to mean something. I don't think that's going to stick. I found the email of him saying that recently, and I thought, I think it really has worked, because people outside know what CASCADE is now. People in government will say, oh, can CASCADE do something about that? People in local authorities do. So one of these things that we just came up with.
But I suppose it also does capture part of what Cascade's about, that we're trying to cascade down knowledge, maybe. Or
I think that was my one doubt about it, because I didn't want it just to be about us imparting knowledge down to other people. Perhaps Whirlpool would have been better. I don't know. Something that made... I'm not very good at physics. Something that makes water come up again.
Well, a fountain pumps the water up and then it cascades down. But fountain doesn't really work, does it?
No. So Cascade has worked. People seem to know Cascade, especially here in Wales. And I got it going. But we were absolutely tiny when we started. We had the university very generously funded a researcher for a year to help us get some grants in and some admin support, but we really had about 3.5 people. And then I buggered off, didn't I? I went off. Excuse my language. I went off to take on a public role to be Children's Commissioner for Wales only a year after we'd launched. And the university recruited you in from England. You crossed the border. We persuaded you to come over. And since then, Cascade, really under your leadership, Cascade became very big. And when I returned 2 years ago, suddenly there were dozens of researchers and projects going on. So tell me what what did you do? How did you get it that big?
So I think after you left, there was a sort of hiatus or holding period of, I guess, about a year before I came along, and people like Jonathan and Crowley did a really sterling job of kind of keeping things going. But it was a bit difficult without a sort of permanent leader. I came in January 2016. I suppose I came to Cardiff. I'd heard lots of good things about it, but also my wife grew up in Wales and her parents live in Wales, so there was sort of already a Welsh connection. And also, like you, I'm Scottish, and I'm Wales, I think, has a lot of similarities to Scotland, obviously landscape, but also culturally in all sorts of ways. So I feel very at home here. But I suppose I hadn't realised what a fantastic confluence of things came together to allow us to do really good research. So we're in the School for Social Science. I don't want this just to sound like I'm advertising, so I'll just keep this short. We're in a fantastic School of Social Sciences with really, world-class qualitative researchers, really strong quantitative researchers. I didn't realise there's a Centre for Trials Research who I just know everything about methodologies for randomised controlled trials and all the related methodologies. I hadn't realised that in Swansea we have data linkage resources that are sort of, I think, certainly amongst the best in the UK. I think they may think they are the best. They're certainly up there, which allows us to do lots of really interesting research there. We have strong links with psychology as well, who are really interested in practical and applied research. And sort of and as you mentioned, funded PhD studentships. So I came from the University of Bedfordshire, where I'd been involved in setting up the Tilda Goldberg Centre, which was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad it still seems to be going well. But at Bedfordshire, there just wasn't the same level of support for research that I found here. So it was kind of like, well, the promised land might be pushing it a little bit, but it was coming into something pretty good, a load of great resources around. We then had the Department for Education big call. I think there are two big sort of developmental things. One is Department for Education wanted to launch the What Works Centre, and they wanted a research partner and then a delivery partner. And we went for that. And with that sort of combination of people and Decipher, which is a centre for public health interventions for children and families, we delivered that programme of work.
Ironically, you ended up doing lots of research about England.
Well, it is.
In Wales.
I think the feedback we got was partly my knowledge of England was one of the things they wanted, so that I'd done lots of research in England, so I wasn't a Welsh researcher who had done all my research in Wales. So we had all this methodological stuff, plus my knowledge of the sector, I think, was kind of important. I mean, if I'm honest, that was a bit of a nightmare in delivery, in that it's a big programme of work. As often happens when it's funded by government, they want things very, very quickly. So they'd want things like a randomised controlled trial to find out whether something works in 18 months. But once you've set it up and everything, and then followed up.
Almost impossible, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that sort of stuff. There was also what you often get in policy stuff, sort of changes of directions. People said they wanted one thing, then they wanted another, time's ticking on. But we got in a whole bunch of really, really brilliant people. I think we did some good work. Then we were fortunate to get infrastructure funding from Healthcare Research Wales, and that's kind of provided the backbone, the core of what we do. And that means that since 2020, so the last 4 years, we've been on a sort of much more even footing, because that's to support us to put in research proposals. And we've essentially concentrated on just getting lots of proposals up in lots of different areas, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. And it pays, doesn't it, for some of the stuff that really underpins our work. So the public involvement work. So it helps.
Absolutely.
It means we can maintain relationships with people who have experience of social care services, often very difficult experience of social care services. It means we can retain a relationship with them and support them in doing that. So we're not sort of diving in, asking people's views and coming away again. It also helps with exchange. So it means that we've got a whole, system for helping people learn about our research as well. So it does feel that's been really crucial, that support.
Absolutely. And public involvement work, well, both those areas of work, and also the administration of all the grants and things. So we've got a portfolio of millions of pounds worth of grants. That's really hard to manage. So we've got a dedicated team to do that. The public involvement, which you put at the heart of Cascade and remains at the heart, I don't know if there's anywhere else I don't know if there's anywhere else anywhere actually that has a whole team dedicated to that. So you lead the team, but it's able to then build up and sustain relationships with people, which means that we're not just trying to set something up for each project, but we can actually have people involved in the design of projects, or even whether we should do projects or not.
Yeah, and a lot of the people we work with in that work have had such bad experience. They've lost trust, I think, in institutions. Yeah. And we'll hear about that in another podcast, actually. But I think it's been a really good way of enabling people to actually think about regaining some trust that change might be able to happen, and that they can actually have a voice in saying, this is what we think's wrong in services, and this is what we think needs to go better. So could you please research this thing and see if you can make it better? So it's been important. Absolutely. But we've been talking about getting lots of grants and moving on with building up a centre to become bigger and bigger. I think you claim it's the biggest in Europe.
This could be untrue, but I haven't found one bigger anyway.
Okay.
That's partly because many European countries just don't have children's social care the way we do.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt at all, we have 40-odd staff, including many part-time and what have you, plus we have links with a wider group of PhD students and affiliates. It's sort of 80 to 100 people. It's really a large organisation.
So it's big. We think it's good quality.
Yeah,
we hope it's good quality. But, why do you actually do it? Because, I think for you and I, we don't do this research, and I think this is the same for everyone else in Cascade. We don't do this research to get grants and to build a career. We do it because we actually think it's so important to research children's social care. Yeah. Why did you become a researcher? Because you were a social worker like me, weren't you?
You're absolutely right. I if I'm honest, there is a bit of me that just building things up, but there is also a bit of me that asks the so what question all the time. And if I retired and they said, "Oh, Donald, you've been great at getting grants, but we can tell you nothing you've done has actually made any difference," I would consider that, well, what would be the point? There's no point in getting the grants unless they make some difference. So I think we're dedicated to making a difference. You asked how I got into research. So I was a social worker. I qualified in 92. I worked in London for quite a while. I'm really interested in research and research that would make a difference. I moved into an academic role. In fact, what I did is I came up with an idea for a PhD, which is around parents who misuse substances, and went to my tutor, and she said, "Oh, this might be a fundable project." So I wrote it up with support from her to the Nuffield Foundation, and got it. And I literally thought, "Oh, that's how it works. You just write an idea and you get it." And I've subsequently realised that getting your first grant application was incredibly fortunate. So essentially, I employed myself. But I mean, I suppose I've always thought universities have an important place. My father was an academic. His father was an academic, third generation. I think they have an important place in society, and I hope they should make a positive difference. So I think part of it comes from that.
But was there something about being a practitioner that made you want to be a researcher? Because there definitely was for me as a social work practitioner.
Yeah. So for me, it was that I couldn't get any answers to any of the questions I asked. I started working with many parents who had drug or alcohol issues. I managed to get half a day off. But it took me 3 memos to 3 different managers in the organisation to get half a day off to go to the library, because there wasn't an internet then, to go to the library, which wasn't very far away, to find out about what research said about how risk factors associated with drug or alcohol using parents. And I just couldn't find anything. And essentially that's what I wrote up as that first proposal, because there wasn't really anything around children's social care and parental alcohol and drug use. Yeah, it was half the families I was dealing with. So, in fact, there was a specific incident, which is kind of embarrassing, about what actually happened, where I was working with 2 parents who had very serious crack and heroin problems. So much so that I'd removed their toddler and I had just taken their baby away from hospital. And we hadn't been able to find them.
Which is just a huge thing to do, isn't
absolutely
it?
Absolutely awful. I mean, it's the worst thing you can do. I mean, fortunately, there is a happy ending for that child that I know they were placed in the wider family and were doing really, really well last time I heard. But we couldn't get hold of the parents anywhere. So, they were a bit chaotically using drugs. So I left lots of messages. They turned up at the office. I had, as you can imagine, a very difficult meeting with them about, where's our baby? But actually, they were saying, we're going to stop using drugs. We've got an appointment to go and detox, and we're going to detox. Then we're going to go into rehab. Then we want to stop using drugs in the community. How long before we can have our baby back? I went up to talk to my manager, who's a fantastic person, but really, we didn't know the answer to the question. And the embarrassing answer I gave, which I would say this is an extremely bad answer, is we went down and said, if you can stay drug-free for 2 weeks, we will think about the baby returning to be with you.
It was a bit sort of finger in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, I would say 2 weeks, considering the very serious problems, was just a very, very risky decision. But they didn't manage one day. They didn't even get to the detox. So kind of the level of concern sorted out the problem. But the fact we didn't have any kind of answers or guidance to really practical questions
no
like
one
that.
had researched what sort of is a tipping point in terms of recovery, I suppose, in children's social care. And I think that's what's quite frustrating, has been quite frustrating about children's social care over the years. I suppose it is, as Andy Pitthouse, one of our colleagues, our former colleagues now retired, said, a bit of an invisible trade. So it's been harder to research, hasn't it? Than perhaps professions that happen mainly in hospitals and clinics or in classrooms, perhaps. But that sort of sense of, we think we're doing something important in children's social care. We know it's needed, but how do we know how to do it well? It leads actually to lots of people in practice feeling often quite knotted up about what we do, I think. I mean, that was very much the motivation for me. I, as a child protection practitioner, would get really quite knotted up inside about making decisions or being part of the decision-making process. In the end, the courts make the decisions about whether children can safely remain at home or not. I would think about it in the middle of the night. And again, parents would challenge me and say, how can this be fair? How can this be right? And I would think, well, we've compiled this evidence. The judge says this was a very well put together set of evidence and was able to make a decision. But I still don't really, really know whether this child, when they're in their early 20s or later in their life will look back and say, are you sure that was the right thing for me? Especially when we do that really drastic step of children being removed permanently from their parents, which of course happens in a tiny number of cases, but it feels like such a big, breach really of family. And yet we do know it's necessary sometimes. And I've also met, young adults who say that was the best thing that anyone could have done for me. But anyway, I felt quite knotted up about it. And I couldn't, again, like you, really find definitive answers when I looked. And like you, we're like twins. I graduated in 1992 as well, and ended up as a Scot in Wales, but indeed, going to the library when you could get away to do that, it was really hard to find any kind of answers, and we still don't have definitive answers to that question, do we? But I think that drive to think, well, does one way of working work better than another? It is definitely what motivates me.
Absolutely. And then that was kind of reinforced by the first study I did, which was the one of parents who misused drugs or alcohol, where I guess I found two things. One is social workers, as well as the assessment stuff, they also didn't know how to work with parents, so they felt really stuck. They didn't feel they had the skills. The parents would deny or minimise their drug or alcohol problem, and the social worker would say, well, I can't really do anything now. And that led me... So I published from that study, but essentially just described a series of problems. It was like lots of the families have got drug and alcohol problems. The social workers haven't had proper training. They don't know how to work with it. Everything's terrible. And I sort of took a vow to myself to try not to do research that just described problems.
It's very typical of research, isn't it? Just to say how everyone's doing things wrong, which is really irritating to practitioners, I have to say.
Absolutely. And obviously there's a place for that. Sometimes describing a problem is what you have to honestly do. But for me, I just felt that you have to go beyond that. You have to be trying to say what could be new ways of doing things or new solutions or new ways of practicing, etc. And I guess that's been a sort of motive in a lot of my research, but also most of the work that Cascade does is kind of explicitly or implicitly, how could we create change? How could we make things better in some way or other? So we'll be looking at lots of the different studies in the next few podcasts, but a lot of them have got that as a kind of core element.
Yeah, and we've talked about how practitioners can feel quite frustrated and really want that change. And I think that's probably what motivated both of us to think, I've got to look at this more deeply. But of course, as practitioners, but now as researchers as well, we hear a lot from people with experiences of receiving those services who say, how can this be done better? There must be better ways. And I think for me, that's a big motivation as well. People saying, I had a bad experience. I don't think it needs to be like this. Could we do it better? And policymakers, we have a lot to do with policymakers. Another good reason for working in a small country, isn't it? We're closer to government in a way.
Absolutely.
In that and we're lucky, I think, here in Wales, in that the Welsh Government is really open to engaging with and debating things and hearing from academics, but and others, in fact, and practitioners and people who use services. But, they really want to, they get a bit frustrated if as academics, all we do is list what's going wrong and then say, and we need to do more research. So give us some more funding. It's a classic conclusion to a study, isn't it?
But there is a sort of problem, which is that the ideal piece of research for a policymaker would be a simple solution to a complex problem. But unfortunately, I have never actually come up with such a thing. Often research does highlight how complex, how entrenched, how difficult things can be. And I guess that's why the so what question is particularly relevant to a lot of the research. And I constantly ask it, what difference are we making? What difference does the research we're doing make? I don't know whether you've got an answer to that question or...
Well, I think as this podcast series goes on, we're going to hopefully highlight some studies that we think are starting to answer some of those questions and to really think through what evidence means and hopefully, have some good examples of ones that do seem to be making a bit of difference on the ground as well, which would be great. But I suppose that leads us into our final question of this podcast, which is, Are there different ways we'd like to take Cascade next? Hopefully we'll still be here in another 10 years. What would you like to see us achieve? Have you got a couple of things on your wish list? I've got a couple.
Well, I've got a few. Do you want to start off with your couple?
Okay, well, I suppose thinking about the areas that I really lead on at the moment, I'm really ambitious about how we involve people with experiences of children's social care services. So I've been cooking up a bit of a plan with you and with some of these parents and young people who have grown up in care as well, about how, rather than just getting them to help us set our research questions and help us understand what we found out and help us tell other people what we found out, I really would like to work with others to get people with lived experience to lead on research, to decide where some of our funding or resource within Cascade goes, and to say, these are the things that we think you should be studying, and this is how we're going to do it, with our support, obviously, because we are paid to be academics and to have that knowledge, but to really work together so that there's less of a sense of the academics are in charge. Yeah. And I think my second thing, am I allowed a second thing?
Yeah, you definitely are, but I just wanted to say something about your first thing, which I just think is such an exciting development. So we've involved people in our research to some degree, but the ideas have often come from academics or practitioners, and to actually have, I know one or two have come from the service user group, but having parents, young people actually say this is an idea, and having dedicated researchers going up, checking whether someone's done the research or not, and if they haven't, actually putting proposals together, I think it's a sort of potentially game-changing sort of initiative. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, so we'll be hopefully doing that over the next few years. And the other thing is really to engage really more closely again with people who are trying to deliver these services, and including writing the policies and the legislation behind that, and really making sure that what we do doesn't feel too ivory tower for them, and that we're doing stuff that will be useful to help them deliver services in a difficult world, in a difficult financial world as well. How about you? What are your top things? Well,
there are top things for Cascade and then top things for me. One of the things for Cascade is to keep doing things we're already doing. So I think we do fantastic evaluations, and I think finding out what works with all the complexity that involves is really important. I think data linkage continues to be a sort of technology of the future. And for those who aren't familiar with it, that's kind of where we can link information about children's social care involvement with, say, health or education or benefits data. Because one of the sort of weird things about children's social care is we've got very little evidence about outcomes, really, because it's very difficult to follow people up for all sorts of reasons. Whereas if you can link anonymously their records with, let's say, health records, you can find out mental health, physical health outcomes years later. So I think that, and also the causes, you can look at issues like poverty or exposure to parental alcohol or drug problems, and see how that sort of maps through in ways that are just so much more sophisticated and can begin to provide large data sets across the whole of the Welsh or even the UK population.
And the great thing about doing that kind of work is you're not bothering people. You're not sending out surveys or observing people, because that data's there, it's anonymised, it's safe, to use. But actually, we're not drawing on all the resources of other people to do it too much. So I'm really excited about that as well.
Absolutely. And then I think an area we will be doing research in is about artificial intelligence and children's social care, because I just think it's a really hot topic, and there's some really exciting initiatives that we can develop in that area. But weirdly, one of the things, I would never have thought I would answer this, one of the things I'd like us to do more is sort of theorise more what we do. So I think some of the things about how we do evaluations, or how we understand data linkage, or for instance, how we understand the social work task itself, that a book I've got coming out next week, I think.
It was a quick advert.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to plug it in every single one. I think without even thinking about it, often use, and many other people often use a metaphor that's sort of taken from health about how we do research that focuses on outcomes and processes. But actually, children's social care is a rights-focused activity. So issues of procedural justice, which are ones that would apply to courts or policing, are probably more appropriate, or at least as appropriate. That has major implications for how we think about evaluation or research, for instance, because the process is the purpose. So I think thinking through things like that more is something that one of the things I'd like to be doing over the next few years. And one of the great things is we have a sort of a whole critical mass of people who are interested in this area, including researchers, but also policymakers and people with public involvement. And I hope over the next few years, we can create conversations and dialogues about some of these issues. Because research is really, for me, about ideas and ideas that can make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, as someone who's spent 7 years out of Cascade in a human rights role, you know, I couldn't agree more about how central it is to us in society here in Wales, but obviously internationally. And, you know, thinking about the human in human rights as well. You know, I think that, you know, Cascade has got to be in the end about human encounters in very difficult times of people's lives. And can we, you know, can we in some way contribute to making those encounters better and helping people's lives improve? Yeah. And it sounds a bit simple, but I think that's where we should finish our first podcast.
I agree. And I'm looking forward to picking up these themes in a series of other podcasts with different researchers from across Cascade. So thank you very much, listeners, for listening to us. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it.
And I did too. So look forward to doing some more podcasts in this series. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon yn ein cyfres o bodlediadau Sgyrsiau Cascade 2024 sy'n dathlu 10 mlynedd ers sefydlu Cascade.
Thank you for listening to this episode in our 2024 Cascade Talks podcast series celebrating 10 years of Cascade.
Mae'r ganolfan ymchwil a datblygu gofal cymdeithasol I blant yn ymdrechu I wella llesiant, diogelwch a hawliau plant a'i teuluoedd.
The Children's Social Care Research and Development Centre strives to improve the well-being, safety and rights of children and their families.
Diolch I ymchwil iechyd a gofal Cymru am eu cefnogaeth ariannol.
We'd like to thank Health and Care Research Wales for their funding support.
Ac I gael rhagor o wybodaeth ynghylch ein dathliad 10 mlynedd a gwaith Cascade, ewch I cascadewales.org.
To find out more about our 10-year celebration and the work of Cascade, visit cascadewales.org.